Venture's effort to make the tools of recovery and the ministry of recovery available to all that come looking as we walk through this season of quarantine and suspension from our normal life. And this has been for everyone. That's been the invitation of what we've done, is the invitation of still what we're trying to do. And it's a season that we are at the end of. I don't know exactly what the future will bring. A lot of the dialogues in the world are divergent, and it's unclear what rules will be in place tomorrow or the next day. But for now, our intention is that this is the final episode of Recovering Hope, as it's been to date. We will be launching live services next week here at Venture in Mill Creek, Monday night at 7 o'clock. And I, for one, am very excited about that, because if I've learned anything in this season, it is just how much joy I derive from watching you do ministry, and I miss that desperately. And this is a very open invitation. I think, as with everything with Venture Church, this is without question an adventure, and is without question an experiment. And for those that feel comfortable attending, please note that we will not have dinner. Service will be a bit different. Masks are strongly encouraged, and if not for your own safety, then for the comfort and safety of your neighbor. This is a great spot to put our own personal opinions away. And make note that we will be executing Venture policy on all of these issues to ensure the safety and comfort that all that attend, which doesn't mean we won't be celebratory. This is entirely about a celebration. We will be celebratory, but we're going to be mindful as we go. And for those who prefer not to attend, I get it. We're going to continue with online sharing groups. We're going to have an online men's group and an online women's group that will be available, and those will run at the same time as the in-person sharing groups at 8 p.m., and we're going to try to find a way to make the service itself available through Zoom. So not publicly, like we've been doing in this season where we've had all this new content, but working with the core CR content, enabling everybody to come back in and our teachers to teach and this ministry to be a bunch of people doing ministry together. We will move to Zoom and make that available for those who are not yet ready to come into the church itself. And I want to stress that there is zero pressure on that. Maybe you want service to start again. Maybe you don't. Maybe you think it's ridiculous that we didn't do this months ago. Maybe you think it's ridiculous that we aren't waiting for months longer. Either of those feelings is okay. You're not going to see or hear an argument from me. My strongest encouragement is that wherever you find yourself on that particular divide, that you follow the convictions of your own heart, like full stop. I wouldn't even question it. Go with what you feel. And that you have the grace and acceptance for those that feel differently. What should be becoming a familiar refrain, that we really need to work and do business with people that see things and do things differently than we do. We've been talking about that a lot, and I expect we will continue to do so. I know that there will be lots of questions, and we will get them answered one day, one question at a time. Okay. So we have arrived. This is the end of a season. So to recap, from when this started way back in March, we've been on a journey through the 12 steps. And we've walked this out in this space of recovering hope. And we started all the way back there on that first effort, and we talked about Job and powerlessness, and into Joshua and the need to find a spot on the ground, get on the ground, choose God, worship God, put your forehead to the floor and invite him into your life. We walked forward through, after that space of surrender, like how do we make that surrender mean something? How do we make it actionable? Accountability for our lives and our stories if we've lived them, with the relationships we've had. I'm inviting other people in to walk with us, the need for character and how Jesus personifies that. All the way through these questions of communication with others, desperation for God, the need to seek him regularly, consistently, and always be growing and working towards him, and all the way to step 12. We made it all the way to right here, where we jumped in last week. With step 12 and principle 8, the phrases are like this: yield myself to be God, to be used to bring this good news to others, both by my example and my words. And this is right where it is, and this is right what it's all about. This is where we live. This is the end, second part of a two-part message that's looking at how we are called to love others. And 2 weeks ago, we jumped in on this, and we stemmed from Pastor Brandon's lesson and messages on the life of Naaman. In the story of Elisha, found in 2 Kings, I strongly encourage you to go back and watch those messages from Brandon. Those were without question prophetic, The way he stepped into those messages and the way they fit events that had not happened yet is something to behold, and I encourage you to strongly to check that out. We jumped into the story of Naaman, who was a leper, and he faced great difficulty in the space of great success as a result of that. And we drew parallels between that and the story of the Good Samaritan, and this question of how we find the path to loving our neighbor. What is it to care for our neighbor? And we looked at the parable and we found that it was a powerful lesson of encouragement towards breaking down barriers of race and of class and towards service and essentially an infinite level of compassion. So my essential argument is that our step 12 or principle 8, however you like to phrase that, is simply, perfectly, exactly a reflection of the greatest commandments as Christ presented them in Matthew 22. So a man turned to Jesus and said, "Teacher, what is the greatest commandment in the law?" And Jesus replied, "Love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your mind. This is the first and greatest commandment. And the second is like it. Love your neighbor as yourself." And that's what we've been wrestling with. What is this loving of the neighbor of the self? And that simply, this action in the second part, our ability to step out of ourselves, our preconceptions, our predispositions, our opinions, our alliances, our armies, our arguments, and our other associations, and choose to care. Just that powerful choice to care about other people, that in a very real way, this is the call of Christ. That this is what it is to be a Christian as an action. Not have you been saved, not did you make a decision, but what it is to being the Christian. We see it expressed clearly in passage after passage after passage after passage of Scripture. I could do it all day long. This, to a very real extent, is the conversation. James 1:27, "Pure and undefiled religion in the sight of our God and Father is this, to visit orphans and widows in their distress, and to keep oneself unstained from the world," to care about people. Romans 13:10, "Love does no wrong to a neighbor. Therefore, love is the fulfillment of the law." Did you care about people? Mark 12:33, "And to love him with all the heart and all the understanding, with all the strength, and to love one's neighbor as himself is much more than all the burnt offerings and sacrifices." Did you care about people? And Micah 6:8, "He has told you, O man, what is good. And what does the Lord require of you? But to do justice, to love kindness, and to walk humbly with your God." Did you care about people? So today I want to continue this conversation. And we're going to look at another parable, and in the end, hopefully, bring this all home. And today we're going to talk about the prodigal son. And so to be clear, when I'm talking about compassion and the importance of compassion and choosing to care about others, I'm not saying the other stuff doesn't matter. It very much does. Questions of salvation, discipline, obedience, creed, calling, and interpretation are all very real, and they're all very important. They just aren't as important. What is most important was stated clearly by Jesus in answer to the question, what is most important? So that there would be no ambiguity on this subject. I challenge you, if you are trying to find some way around that there is no way around that. These are the core values of God himself, and he's the one that said so. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, strength, mind, and soul, and love your neighbor as yourself. So it's funny. So this one was hard for me to get. Okay, I will tell you a little story, and maybe it will serve one or two people. I am a type A control freak perfectionist. So years ago, I was running around very new in my recovery, looking for Jesus under every bush. I still do. And I was just terrible at doing it right. I had zero practice at being a good person, an actual good person. I had endless practice at pretending to be a good person and convincing people I was. That was a dangerous set of relationships. So the word like how I knew how to do this while doing nothing to protect myself, it was alien. Up until this point, my primary skill set had been deception, and my hobby had been drug abuse. I didn't know how to pray. I didn't know how to admit I was wrong. I didn't know how to serve other people. I knew nothing about the heart of God, And my motives were terrible. I showed up in recovery with the worst possible motives. I wanted everything to go back to normal. I wanted my stuff back. I wanted to be uncaught. That was it. That was the entry. And guess what? That's enough. I was hungry. God can work with that. See, I was told on day one in treatment that all it took was honesty, open-mindedness, and willingness, and that the rest was on God. I ran with that. What other choice did I have? I ran with it. And I started learning everything I could, and I started applying all the gifts and abilities I have, whatever they are, to becoming the opposite of what I had been previously. And I went 180 degrees, and I decided to follow all the rules. I was intolerable. In the middle of that, developing what any sort of practice observer would recognize as an odd blend of obsessive-compulsive disorder and Christian perfectionism, I would turn to God in my heart and I would ask him, was that good? I would turn to God and I would say, was that right? Did I do that right? I'd never done this before. I'd never worried about actually doing it right. I'd only worried about whether people would recognize that it was right. And so I was a child. I mean, we talk about having a new life, and we quote scripture like 2 Corinthians 5:17 that we're given a new life, and I even took a new name. I said, please don't call me Dan anymore. My name is Daniel. But in a very real way, I was a newborn. I didn't know how to do any of these things. And so I turned to God and I'd say, was that good? Was that right? And I was like a scared little lamb trying so hard to do it right. So scared of screwing it up. Because it wasn't proven to me. I didn't have faith in any of it working. And yet it seemed like maybe, just maybe, I was in the middle of the beginning of a miracle. And God, being very gracious, was for a time very encouraging. Yes, Daniel, good job, I'd hear in my heart. So, time out. Side note, I believe that God is real, relational, and that he talks to me directly. I believe that we are in the age of miracles right now. And maybe obnoxiously, I believe that if you don't believe so, that is in fact likely to be one of the major things stopping you from participating. And I also believe that if what I just said sounds ridiculous, you should come prove me wrong. Take on a season of seeking the person of the Holy Spirit and asking him for it and try for it. And then come talk to me about what happens. And you know what? I also believe it's fine. If you think I'm crazy, I'm good with that. I know I'm crazy, so we won't actually have a fundamental disagreement about that, probably only about the way in which I'm crazy. So, back to it. I'm talking to God. I'm going to him, and I'm used to this attaboy. Oh, I need those attaboys so bad. I'm so insecure. And I, the baby Christian, reformed criminal, hyper-tense religious rule follower, in desperate need of an attaboy, heard this. Who cares? Did you care about people? What? Where was my attaboy? The conversation had suddenly changed. And so, like any insane person, I went back to him and I said the same thing the next time. And again, the same response. And again, the same response. And I'd maybe meet with a sponsee, have kind of hard, beautiful conversations that I'd have with the sponsee, where my understanding and my theology were stretched and pushed. And I turned to God, and I'd want to know that I didn't betray this thing I'd been given. And I'd say, God, did I do it right? And I'd hear, who cares? Did you care about people? Again and again, I turned to him in my heart, looking for some sort of justification that I had become good, a good Christian, an expert in doing things right. I, who had been so very good at doing them wrong. And you know what? Past a certain point, it just didn't seem like God was interested in the conversation. He seemed to be saying that wasn't the point. He was right. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, strength, mind, and soul, and love your neighbor as yourself. That's the point. Helping the widow, the orphan, and the foreigner. That's the point. That's the point. Caring about people and trusting God to make all the things right and perfect. That's the point. celebrating the return of another son or daughter to God. That's the point. Do you care about people? That's the point. My belief is that that's the question. Will you care about people? Will you take that as your mission right now if you have not? And if you did before, are you doing it? And following that, will you celebrate their recovery? All right, grab your Bibles. We're in Luke 15, 11 through 32, titled The Parable of the Lost Son. It says, Jesus continued, "There was a man who had 2 sons. The younger one said to his father, 'Father, give me my share of the estate.' And so the father divided his property between them. Not long after that, the younger son got together all that he had and set off for a distant country and there squandered his wealth in wild living. After he had spent everything, there was a severe famine in that whole country, and he began to be in need. So he went and hired himself out to a citizen of that country who sent him to the fields to feed the pigs. He longed to fill his stomach with the pods that the pigs were eating, but no one gave him anything. When he came to his senses, he said, 'How many of my father's hired servants have food to spare? And here I am, starving to death. I will set out and go back to my father, and I will say to him, Father, I have sinned against heaven and against you. I'm no longer worthy to be called your son. Make me like one of your hired servants.' So he got up and went to his father." He had a plan. It says, "But while he was still a long way off, his father saw him and was filled with compassion for him. And he ran to his son, threw his arms around him and kissed him. And the son said to him, Father, I have sinned against heaven and against you, and I am no longer worthy to be called your son. But the father said to his servants, Quick, bring the best robe and put it on him. Put a ring on his finger and sandals on his feet. Bring the fattened calf and kill it. Let's have a feast and celebrate. For the son of mine was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found.' So they began to celebrate. Meanwhile, the older son, his brother, was in the field. When he came near the house, he heard music and dancing. So he called to one of the servants and he asked him, What's going on? Your brother has come, he replied, and your father has killed the fattened calf because he has him back safe and sound. The older brother became angry and refused to go in. So his father went out and pleaded with him. But he answered his father, Look, all these years I've been slaving for you, and I have never disobeyed your orders. Yet you never even gave me a young goat so I could celebrate with my friends. But when this son of yours, who squandered your property with prostitutes, comes home, you kill the fattened calf for him. My son, the father said, you are always with me, and everything I have is yours. But we had to celebrate and be glad, because this brother of yours was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found." Ask you a question. How is that last line not the anthem of Celebrate Recovery? We had to celebrate and be glad because this brother of yours was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found. See, I think it's very easy for us to hear Celebrate Recovery and make it about us. I did. I totally did. 100%. I heard and saw an invitation to celebrate recovery myself, to get over which needed to happen, the arrogance that brought me to CR, and humble down enough to join and participate in the fun, to maybe occasionally even clap when everyone's clapping, to loosen up, to start the long work of getting over myself, to believe that my recovery was worth celebrating. And I think that's true. That's important and that's necessary, but that is just the start. That's day one. That's day one. This work of recovery that sounds so daunting at first is just the beginning. The walk towards his perfection is a lifetime, and we're given such amazing tools for that. See, where we live on this journey with Jesus that will last us all of our days is here, verse 32 again. We had to celebrate and be glad because this brother of yours was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found. It says we had to celebrate recovery, That's what Celebrate Recovery is if you choose to stay here. It's that celebration. It is far less, did I get it perfect, and far more, did you care about people? It is much less celebrate my recovery and much more celebrate your recovery. I believe, case in point, that God gives us this parable to tell us, laser clear, that this is the path, what it looks like, and who we will be on it, unavoidably. The challenges, the natures, the roles. So let's unpack it. So this parable is one of the most talked about in all of Jesus' teachings. I'm gonna skip right past the classical interpretations of this parable and just tell you what I think it means. But for those of you who are curious to study the parable, I recommend the following 3 resources: Kingdom, Grace, and Judgment by Robert Farrar Capon, Jesus and the Victory of God by N.T. Wright, and Short Stories by Jesus by Amy Jill Levine. Those 3 books will give you 3 entirely divergent opinions and encourage you on your own journey of exploration. And I think there is wisdom and insight in all of them, frankly. I also think God is big enough that any one act of his has not one meaning but a near infinite set. So saying why God says something a certain way is essentially dangerous, frankly, arrogant. My belief is that he knew exactly where you would be when you heard it and what thought it would bring to your mind just as much as he did where I would be and the thoughts that would come to my mind. And he knew for a fact ahead of time that those would and can be different because we are different. You and I, we are not the same. And same you to your neighbor. We see things differently. We disagree on things as well. While all of us earnestly seek the truth. That's okay. In fact, I'd argue that's how we get closer to truth. That we can disagree on things and still talk to one another with civility and curiosity to discover truth. This is how we grow. How dangerous a world it would be if we only talk to the people that already agree with us. And how sad, frankly, bluntly, how off mission can we get? But I am off mission myself. My point is that there is a lot of truth baked into this parable. And my encouragement is not to take my read on this as the truth, but to, as yourself, take it as a truth and then explore and find your own walk with God, your own understanding of it. And if you're hungry, like I am, go and take ownership of it. Wrestle it out. Do the research. See where God takes you. So this is where God took me, and it's what I have to share with you today. Coffee. My thought is that among many other true things, what this parable describes is a journey. And I don't mean the journey of the prodigal son. Specifically, what this parable describes to me is the journey that we like to call recovery, and the church as a whole likes to call sanctification. The process and road by which we, you, I, walk from our bottoms, wherever or however low that may be, into the grace of God, and on further into participating in and as his heart as we become who he calls us to be, as we take on the nature and character of his son. It is a journey of a million moments captured here in 3 persons. Let's take a look. 1, the prodigal son. So for most of us, this will be who we were or the past. And so, time out. If you're new and the person of the prodigal son is not the past, but right now, honestly, that's incredibly encouraging. And I know, even if things seem really dark, that can be hard to hear or understand, but you are at the beginning of a beautiful journey. If you will trust the story, cleave to God, and not give up. I want to encourage you right now to connect with some of the members of this ministry and give them a chance to serve you and walk with you. Drop a note in the comments. Join one of our small groups. If you're comfortable with it, please come out next Monday and allow us to celebrate with you. So on the person of the prodigal son, there's a few things I want to point out first and foremost. And this can be easy to miss because, the guy he messes up, and then he makes the decision to go home. But a couple of things are real clear. 1, his motivations were selfish. This guy was hungry. He did not come to the realization that he had done wrong and wanted his father to love him, or he felt remorseful. No, he was hungry. And he thought his father's hired hands were doing better, and so why not? And he figured out what to do, and he went home. Given that, 2, he was welcomed with love and joy, and 3, he was not required to prove anything to be accepted. So you know who else was selfish? Me. I was selfish. When I showed up for recovery, went to treatment, made my first confessions, good motives were a long, long way away. And that's okay. If the requirements for starting this journey was a clean heart, we would have 0 participants. 0 participants. Psalm 51:10, create in me a clean heart, O God, and renew a right spirit within me. That is an ongoing thing. This, at the start, is often a very selfish process. That's okay. When you come in hurting, wanting the pain to stop, that's okay. Don't make the mistake of judging these motives as unworkable. God does not. Flawed but hungry, God can work with that. God will work with that. He does so again and again and again in the Bible. And I've seen him do it again and again and again right here in our ministry at Venture Church. I saw him do it in me. So most of us come looking for something, and it's something we want. We have a selfish motive. And God says, I can work with that. And the person starts to change. And the things get radical. God changes men and women from the ground up as lives and souls are reinvented. And I think the only limit to how much change can occur is our willingness to accept the help. So we walk in that. We surrender to it. We get sponsors and friends, and we expose our secrets, and we start to face our fears until one day the story changes. Because you don't stay the prodigal son forever. Eventually you become the older brother. And so for most of us, this is our right now. If you've been around for a while, this is your right now. And I don't mean that critically. I don't mean that you and I make a pouty speech every time someone tries to lean into grace and go, what about me? Truly selfish about pride or place. I'm talking about something much, much, much more subtle. My point is that the older brother in the story represents a dynamic between us and our own humility, our own honesty, and our own awareness that relates to how we will serve others and how it relates to loving others as ourselves. What I mean is that the spot that the older brother is holding down, this is us. And he botches it. He botches it pretty bad. It's pretty easy to see. But you know what's even more dangerous? Botching it and you don't know it. Botching it and no one points it out. Developing habits of judgment that you might not even know. I mean, given your history, does that really seem beyond you? And that doesn't mean we should all feel convicted of that, but I think there's a very open question to say, am I doing this? Where am I in this? Especially because the thing most of us do with this story, especially given the past that many of us have in Celebrate Recovery and the brokenness it took to walk in the door, and I get that, is that we are the prodigal sons and daughters, and I am telling you, no, we were. And the challenge to us is not, are we acting like this older brother, but what kind of older sibling are we being? With it as a given that you are the older sisters and the older brothers, how are you doing that job? Have you wrestled with doing it intentionally? Have you accepted, acknowledged, and started to deal with the fact that you have the privilege and responsibility of deciding how you are going to welcome your younger brothers and sisters home? And you know what? If you're human, you probably won't get this perfect. Some of you likely need to remember that you're not the little brother anymore, that you have responsibilities and your story has changed. Some of you could probably do with remembering you were once the little brother, that this was at one point your story, and have more compassion. And it's funny. It's funny how those can shift back and forth. But getting it perfect? I don't. It's not in the cards for me. So, another story. Recently, someone reached out to me, and this was on the back end of tremendous deceptions, terrible decisions. And I'm meeting with this guy, and all this guy could talk about is getting back to where he was. I wasn't hearing any of the things I look for. Remorse, humility, awareness, the seeking of wisdom and understanding from God, the dissection of self in an effort to get there. the care for others. I didn't hear it. I didn't hear any of it. And I see this stuff all the time. I have this amazing privilege of meeting with all sorts of people, and pretty much everyone I talk to, those are the spaces where our dialogues start. I listen and I engage, and I listen with empathy and compassion, and I hear the thing, and it's like that's the place where I get to be a party to what God's going to do, and it's such a privilege. It's like that's my job, right? To see those places and be a part of that story, to enable that, hands and feet. Such a privilege and a gift. And I'm listening to him, and I'm thinking, this isn't real. I'm looking, and I'm thinking, he doesn't mean it. And then God whispered, and he said, you know who he looks like? I look back at God, and I say, who? You. Knocked me down. Could not be more true. I looked terrible. My motives were all wrong. I wanted to be right and didn't have a clue how. This individual I was talking to looked like me, and if anything, looked better than me. Me before I'd learned the things that I needed to learn to go on that journey. Me before I'd seen hundreds walk out this journey. Me before I'd grabbed on or enabled the miraculous fruit God has given me to actually do anything. Me before I'd seen so many others fail on poor motive, dishonesty, or unwillingness. Me before I thought that I could somehow judge. Me before I was the older brother. Now, I want to be clear. I think that we are all the older brother, whether we want to be or not. That this is the role and a responsibility with an endless learning curve, which you and I will deal with for all of our days as God grows us. Until we come home into everything God calls us to, and what is imputed to us now is imparted to us in full, we will wrestle in that gap to love others as ourselves. But in that moment, I failed. I was the child going to God and saying, did I do it right? And he asked, did you care about people? And it's a funny thing. It's a really funny thing, but you know what? It really isn't my business whether you succeed or not. It's not my business whether you're well-motivated or not. It's actually not my job to find those places and levers and to help enable the work of God in your life, to be a part of that story, to be hands and feet. Nope. You know what is my job? My job is to love you as if you were me. And in the business of loving me, I have infinite grace, suspended judgment, and endless patience and limitless second chances. This isn't a new lesson, but it is for me a deepening of an existing discussion with God as he grows me into a better older brother and he helps me remember what it was like to be the younger brother. So that when the day comes that his good work will be complete in me, that I will be like, number 3, the Father. So every theologian will agree on this one thing in the parable. The Father represents God. I agree. And I'm going to give a caveat on that. And I think that in our read that he represents the Father heart of God in a way that's instructive. This is what we're supposed to attain. This is who we're supposed to grow and become into. In fact, I'll go further. I believe the Father in the parable describes who we will become inexorably, unavoidably, as we surrender into and trust God to guide our steps. And so that doesn't also mean that the present has to look much different. So my story of a moment ago aside, I hope that overall I typify the nature of the character of the Father in this parable. It's what I'm aiming for, right or wrong, más o menos. This is the model that we are given on welcoming those who come hungry. And his response is swift and uncalculating. It is entirely 100% unselfish. The selfish need of the prodigal, the weighing of decisions of the older brother, all of that is absent. The Father, secure in who and what he is, he has nothing to lose. And it raises such an amazing question of what are we holding back for? And he runs out to welcome his son. Zero calculation, and he celebrates. He celebrates his son's recovery. Literally. This is literally a story of celebrating recovery. This is God's instruction on how to celebrate recovery. This is God's instruction on who we are to be in his heart for celebrating recovery, and it is boundless grace and celebration. This parable is an embossed invitation that you and I are to celebrate recovery. And that, specifically, we are to celebrate the recovery of those who are not yet prepared to celebrate. Those who are walking in the door and can barely get a word out. Those who may have mixed up motives, messed up hearts, illogical thoughts, lies on their lips, confused stories. We are to love and believe and celebrate the recovery because we aren't the ones that get it done. God is. Far be it for us to give up on people before God does. That is not who we are called to be. God doesn't qualify it, and he doesn't ask questions. He says this. He says, quick! Bring the best robe and put it on him. Put a ring on his finger and sandals on his feet. Bring the fattened calf and kill it. Let's have a feast and celebrate. For this son of mine was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found. So they began to celebrate. They began to celebrate recovery. Celebrate recovery has been around for a long time. So here's my point. We will all wrestle with having been the prodigal. There's no way to the foot of the cross without it. And we will all wrestle with being an older brother or sister as we welcome people to the cross. And we will all attain in time the Father heart of God if we are willing to submit to his teaching and learn the unforced rhythms of grace. And that is what we do here at Celebrate Recovery. If you want to join in the celebration and celebrate the recoveries that God is authoring in our midst, I encourage you to come out next Monday at 7 to Venture Church in Mill Creek, where we're going to do something a little bit different. It is coin night, and rather than having a teaching or a testimony, we're going to take a moment and we're going to celebrate. We will move from worship into coins, and we'll take some time there and really celebrate those who want to share, and then move on to small groups. We're working on a way, again, to make service accessible to Zoom so that for those whom attendance is not the right choice, they will still be able to participate for as long as is needed. And my intent is that we keep that going as long as is needed. That's pretty simple. Tonight, we have our last full suite of online Zoom groups, and we'll move next week to the groups themselves starting at 8 online, and hopefully we'll be able to have that first service available at 7. Make sure to check Facebook and to communicate with your group leaders if you want to participate in the online groups. And if you are a leader, please do stay tuned to the team group me as things continue to be more clear as they develop. And remember, it's all an adventure. It's all an experiment. And as always, I very much appreciate your patience. I am entirely grateful for this ridiculous privilege. And thank you for letting me share.